August 15, 1948, 2:47 p.m. Captain O'Malley's knuckles were already bloody when he raised his nightstick for the 12th time. 200 people stood watching from storefronts, fire escapes, and sidewalks as 6 NYPD officers beat Bumpy Johnson unconscious in broad daylight. The crime? Walking while black in his own neighborhood. The punishment? A beating so savage that witnesses thought they were watching a murder. But here's what nobody expected. When the DA's office started investigating 3 weeks later, they couldn't find a single witness, not one. 200 people had watched Bumpy Johnson get beaten half to death by corrupt cops, and suddenly every single one of them had developed amnesia. "I didn't see nothing," became the neighborhood anthem. "Wasn't there that day. Must have been inside when it happened." The case fell apart before it even started. The DA was furious. The newspapers called it a conspiracy of silence. Civil rights groups demanded federal intervention. But Harlem just shrugged and went about its business. What nobody understood, what the newspapers never figured out, what even the FBI missed when they opened their investigation, was that those 200 witnesses weren't protecting themselves from the police. They were protecting the police from Bumpy Johnson. Because what happened that day on 125th Street wasn't just a beating. It was a declaration of war. And Bumpy Johnson had a very specific way of dealing with people who declared war on him. The silence wasn't fear of speaking up. The silence was fear of what would happen to those cops if Bumpy ever found out who talked. Hey, if you're loving these untold stories of how Bumpy Johnson really operated, make sure you smash that like button and hit subscribe. Trust me, what you're about to learn will change everything you think you know about power, loyalty, and street justice. To understand why 200 people chose to protect 6 corrupt cops from Bumpy Johnson's revenge, you need to understand what Harlem was like in 1948 and why that beating was the biggest mistake the NYPD ever made. 1948 was a different time in Harlem. The neighborhood was caught between two worlds. The Renaissance had ended, but the civil rights movement hadn't really started. Black folks had money, culture, and pride. But they had no legal protection when white authority decided to flex its power. The NYPD's 28th precinct treated Harlem like occupied territory. They'd roll through in squadrons looking for any excuse to assert their dominance. Black business owners paid protection money. Black teenagers got their heads cracked for looking at officers the wrong way. Black women faced harassment that would make your skin crawl, and nobody could do anything about it. Officially, but Bumpy Johnson wasn't operating officially. By 1948, Bumpy had been running numbers in Harlem for over a decade. But his real power didn't come from gambling. It came from being the man who stood between his community and the wolves. When landlords tried to evict families illegally, Bumpy made house calls. When businesses got shaken down by gangs, Bumpy provided better security than the police ever could. When young men disappeared into the system on trumped-up charges, Bumpy knew which judges to call and which lawyers actually fought for their clients. He'd built something the cops couldn't understand, a parallel justice system that actually worked for black people. Captain Dennis O'Malley hated everything Bumpy represented. O'Malley was a 20-year veteran who believed Harlem belonged to him and his boys. He'd grown rich taking bribes from white criminals while terrorizing black citizens. Bumpy's influence made O'Malley look weak, and weakness wasn't something O'Malley could tolerate. For months, O'Malley had been looking for the right moment to make an example out of Bumpy, something public, something that would remind everyone in Harlem who really ran the streets. The opportunity came on a hot Tuesday afternoon in August. Bumpy was walking out of Thompson's barber shop on 125th Street when O'Malley and 5 officers rolled up in 2 squad cars. They'd been drinking. That much was obvious. Day drinking was standard practice for O'Malley's crew. They figured the badge gave them immunity from consequences. "Well, well, well," O'Malley called out, stepping out of the lead car. "If it isn't the king of Harlem himself." Bumpy kept walking. He knew the game. Don't give them an excuse. Don't escalate. Handle it legally later through channels. But O'Malley wasn't interested in playing games that day. He was interested in making a statement. "I said, hold up, boy," O'Malley shouted. "Don't you walk away when a police officer is talking to you." That word, boy, carried 300 years of hatred behind it. It hung in the air like a challenge. Bumpy turned around slowly. Is there a problem, Captain? Yeah, there's a problem. The problem is, you think you run these streets. The problem is, you think that badge you're not wearing makes you untouchable. The problem is, you forgot who's really in charge around here. By now, a crowd had gathered. Shopkeepers stepped outside. People leaned out of windows. Cars slowed down. Everyone could feel the tension building. Bumpy's voice stayed calm. I'm just trying to go home, Captain. I haven't broken any laws. Haven't broken any laws? O'Malley laughed and looked at his officers. Boys, I think this gentleman is resisting arrest. Arrest for what? Bumpy asked. For being a smart-mouthed Negro who doesn't know his place. That's when O'Malley pulled out his nightstick. The first blow caught Bumpy across the ribs. The second cracked his shoulder blade. By the third, the other officers had joined in. What followed was 5 minutes of pure brutality. 6 grown men with badges and weapons beating one man who never raised his hands to defend himself. Bumpy took every blow standing up until his legs finally gave out. Then they kept hitting him while he was down. The crowd grew to over 200 people. Mothers covered their children's eyes. Men clenched their fists until their knuckles went white. Women cried openly in the street. But nobody moved. Nobody intervened. Nobody even shouted for them to stop, because everybody understood the rules. If you interfere with the police come back later with more cops. And next time, it's not just one man getting beaten. Next time, it's a riot. Next time, the National Guard gets called in. Next time, people die. So they watched. They bore witness. They remembered every detail. And they waited. When it was over, Bumpy Johnson lay unconscious in a pool of his own blood while Captain O'Malley wiped his nightstick clean with a handkerchief. Let that be a lesson to all of you, O'Malley announced to the crowd. This is what happens when you forget who runs Harlem. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. 3 days later, while Bumpy was still unconscious in Harlem Hospital, Captain O'Malley was feeling pretty good about himself. He'd made his point. He'd shown the whole neighborhood who had the real power. The beating had been witnessed by hundreds of people, but nobody had filed a complaint. Nobody had called the newspapers. Nobody had demanded justice. As far as O'Malley was concerned, the lesson had been learned. What O'Malley didn't know was that while he was celebrating at Murphy's Tavern with his fellow officers, a very different kind of meeting was taking place across town. Dr. Samuel Williams, Harlem's most respected physician, was sitting in a hospital room watching over an unconscious Bumpy Johnson. Williams had been treating Bumpy for 3 days, broken ribs, concussion, internal bleeding. The beating had been professional-level brutality. But it was what Dr. Williams saw when Bumpy finally woke up that would change everything. Most men who'd survived what Bumpy had been through would be angry. They'd be talking about revenge, about getting even, about showing those cops they'd picked the wrong man to mess with. Bumpy was perfectly calm. Doc, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I need you to make some phone calls for me. Bumpy, you need to rest. You need to heal. We can worry about... No, Bumpy interrupted. We need to worry about this now, because O'Malley just made the biggest mistake of his life. He thinks he won. He thinks he showed everybody who's boss, but what he really did was show me exactly who he is, and now I know how to handle him. Over the next 48 hours, Dr. Williams made a series of very specific phone calls on Bumpy's behalf. Not to lawyers, not to civil rights groups, not to newspapers, to witnesses. Each conversation was brief and followed the same pattern. Mrs. Patterson? This is Dr. Williams. I'm calling about what happened to Bumpy Johnson the other day. I understand you saw the whole thing. Yes, it was terrible. No, I'm not asking you to testify or file any reports. Actually, I'm calling to ask you to do the exact opposite. If anyone asks you what you saw, I need you to tell them you didn't see anything. You weren't there. You don't know what they're talking about. I know it seems strange, but Bumpy specifically asked me to tell you this. He said to tell you that he's handling this his way, and the best thing you can do to help him is to stay quiet. Yes, he's going to be fine. And yes, he appreciates your loyalty. The same message went out to every witness. The barber who'd watched from his shop window. The mother who'd covered her child's eyes. The teenagers who'd seen everything from the corner, the shop owners who'd stepped outside. Every single person who'd witnessed the beating got the same call with the same message. Stay quiet. Let Bumpy handle this his way. At first, people didn't understand. They wanted justice. They wanted those cops arrested. They wanted the newspapers to write about what had happened. They wanted the whole world to know about Captain O'Malley's brutality. But they also trusted Bumpy Johnson. For over a decade, he'd been the man who protected their neighborhood. He'd never steered them wrong before. So when the district attorney's office started their investigation a week later, they hit a wall of silence that confused everyone. Assistant District Attorney Robert Chen had been assigned to the case after pressure from the NAACP. The complaint had come from outside the neighborhood, a white reporter who'd heard rumors about the beating. Chen was determined to build a solid case against O'Malley and his officers, but every lead turned into a dead end. I'm looking for witnesses to the beating of Ellsworth Johnson on August 15th, Chen would say. Don't know nothing about that, came the reply. Records show you live right across the street from where it happened. Must have been inside that day. Your neighbor said she saw you watching from your window. Your neighbor's mistaken. Chen couldn't understand it. A man gets beaten unconscious by 6 police officers in broad daylight in front of hundreds of people, and suddenly everyone in Harlem had selective amnesia. The newspapers started calling it a conspiracy of silence. Civil rights lawyers blamed intimidation tactics by the police. The FBI opened an investigation into witness tampering. Nobody suspected the truth. The witnesses were protecting the police from Bumpy Johnson. Because while everyone was focused on the legal case, Bumpy was building a different kind of case entirely, and his verdict would be delivered in ways the courts never could. 2 weeks after the beating, Bumpy Johnson walked out of Harlem Hospital. Physically, he was still healing. Mentally, he was already 10 moves ahead of everyone else in the game. The first thing Bumpy did was visit his information network. In Harlem, information was more valuable than money, and Bumpy had spent years cultivating the best intelligence operation north of the FBI. Shoeshine boys who heard every conversation, waitresses who served drinks to loose-tongued cops, cleaning ladies who emptied trash cans in police stations, taxi drivers who knew where everyone went and when, numbers runners who moved through every neighborhood and saw everything. Within 24 hours, Bumpy knew everything about Captain O'Malley's life. He knew O'Malley lived in Queens with his wife Margaret and their 2 teenage daughters. He knew O'Malley stopped at Murphy's Tavern every night after work and drank himself stupid on bootleg whiskey. He knew O'Malley was skimming money from evidence lockers and selling it to fences in Brooklyn. He knew O'Malley owed $15,000 to Irish bookmakers who were getting impatient about collecting. But most importantly, Bumpy knew about O'Malley's Friday night routine. Every Friday, O'Malley would finish his shift, hit Murphy's Tavern until around 10 p.m., then drive to a warehouse in Queens where he conducted his most lucrative side business, selling police protection to anyone willing to pay for it. Irish gangs, Italian smugglers, Jewish bookmakers. O'Malley didn't discriminate as long as the money was green. He'd built a network of corrupt cops who looked the other way for the right price. The warehouse meetings were O'Malley's pride and joy. Every week, 20 to 30 criminals would show up with their protection money. O'Malley would hold court like a king, deciding who got to operate and who got shut down. It was the perfect place to make a statement. But Bumpy's plan wasn't about violence. Anyone could beat up a corrupt cop. Anyone could shoot someone in a dark alley. That was amateur hour. Bumpy was going to do something much more devastating. He was going to destroy O'Malley's reputation, his career, and his criminal empire all at the same time. And he was going to do it using O'Malley's own greed against him. The plan started with a phone call to Mickey Sullivan, a mid-level Irish criminal who'd been paying O'Malley protection money for months. Mickey owed Bumpy a favor from back in '45, and it was time to collect. "Mickey, I need you to set up a special meeting with O'Malley," Bumpy said. "Tell him you've got a big score coming up and you need extra protection. Tell him there's $10,000 in it for him if he shows up Friday night with his best men." "Bumpy, I don't know if I should be getting in the middle of whatever you're planning." "Mickey, remember when those Brooklyn boys were trying to muscle in on your territory? Remember who made that problem disappear?" "Yeah, I remember." Then you know I'm not asking. I'm calling in the favor. Mickey made the call. O'Malley took the bait. Next, Bumpy reached out to Detective Frank Romano of Internal Affairs. Romano was one of the few honest cops in the NYPD, and he'd been trying to build a case against O'Malley for 2 years. The problem was he never had enough evidence to make charges stick. Detective Romano, this is Ellsworth Johnson. I understand you've been investigating Captain O'Malley. Mr. Johnson, I heard about what happened to you. I'm sorry we haven't been able to. That's not why I'm calling. I'm calling because I have information you need. Information about O'Malley's protection racket. I'm listening. Friday night. Warehouse at 47th and Queens Boulevard. 10:30 p.m. O'Malley will be there conducting business with about 30 criminals. They'll be discussing protection payments, territory agreements, and criminal operations. You'll have enough evidence to put him away for 20 years. How do you know all this? Because I make it my business to know. The question is, are you going to do your job? Romano was suspicious but interested. He'd been trying to catch O'Malley in the act for years. The final piece of Bumpy's plan involved the newspapers. Specifically, Robert Martinez, an investigative reporter for the New York Herald who'd been trying to expose police corruption for months. Martinez had been one of the few people pushing for justice in Bumpy's beating case. Bumpy arranged to meet Martinez at a coffee shop in the village. Mr. Martinez, you wanted the story about police corruption in Harlem? I'm going to give you the story of the decade, but you have to follow my instructions exactly. What kind of instructions? Friday night, warehouse at 47th and Queens Boulevard, 10:30 p.m. Bring a photographer. Hide outside. Document everything you see, but don't move until the shooting stops. Shooting? Mr. Johnson, I'm not comfortable with. Nobody's going to get hurt, but there might be some noise. The important thing is you document who's there, what they're discussing, and how much money changes hands. This is your chance to expose the biggest police corruption scandal in New York history. By Thursday night, all the pieces were in place. O'Malley thought he was going to collect $10,000 from Mickey Sullivan. Detective Romano thought he was finally going to catch O'Malley in a criminal act. Reporter Martinez thought he was going to get the scoop of his career. None of them realized they were all part of Bumpy Johnson's chess game. Friday night was going to be very interesting. But Bumpy had one more move to make, the most important move of all. Because the plan wasn't just about destroying O'Malley, it was about sending a message to every corrupt cop in New York City about what happened when you declared war on Harlem. Friday, August 29, 1948, 10:30 p.m. The warehouse in Queens was buzzing with activity when Captain O'Malley arrived. 30 criminals had shown up for the weekly protection meeting, each carrying envelopes full of cash. Irish bookmakers, Italian smugglers, Jewish loan sharks, O'Malley's criminal United Nations. O'Malley was in a good mood. The Bumpy Johnson situation had blown over. No witnesses had come forward. No charges had been filed. The DA's office had quietly dropped their investigation. As far as O'Malley was concerned, he'd proven his point and gotten away clean. Plus, Mickey Sullivan had promised him an extra $10,000 for tonight's special protection arrangement. Life was good. What O'Malley didn't notice was the black sedan parked across the street with Detective Romano and 2 internal affairs investigators inside. He also didn't notice the photographer crouched behind a dumpster, ready to document everything. Mickey Sullivan was already inside when O'Malley walked in with his 5 most trusted officers. Mickey looked nervous, which wasn't unusual. Most of O'Malley's clients looked nervous. Fear was part of the business model. "Mickey," O'Malley called out, "you said you had something special for me tonight." "Yeah, Captain, about that." Mickey's voice was shaking. "I need to tell you something." "What's wrong with you? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have." "Captain, you know that beating you gave Bumpy Johnson a couple weeks ago?" O'Malley's smile faded. "What about it?" "Well, Bumpy wants to have a word with you." That's when the warehouse lights went out. In the darkness, O'Malley heard his officers reaching for their weapons. He heard criminals diving for cover. He heard Mickey Sullivan whispering what sounded like a prayer. When the lights came back on 10 seconds later, Bumpy Johnson was standing in the center of the warehouse. Not hiding, not armed, just standing there like he owned the place. Behind him were 20 men that O'Malley recognized as Bumpy's crew, but they weren't holding guns. They were holding cameras. "Good evening, Captain," Bumpy said. His voice was calm, conversational, like he was greeting an old friend. "I hope you don't mind me crashing your party." O'Malley's hand moved toward his service weapon. "This is a private meeting, Johnson. You're trespassing. Actually, I think you're the one who's trespassing. See, this warehouse belongs to a friend of mine, has for about 6 months now. Which means every meeting you've held here, every criminal transaction you've conducted, every protection payment you've collected, it's all been recorded." Bumpy gestured to the walls. O'Malley looked around and realized there were cameras mounted in every corner, cameras that had been documenting his criminal enterprise for months. "You've been filming us?" one of the Irish bookmakers shouted. "Not me," Bumpy said. "The FBI. See, it turns out the federal government is very interested in police corruption, especially when that corruption involves interstate gambling, smuggling operations, and racketeering, especially when it involves civil rights violations." O'Malley was starting to sweat. "You're bluffing." "Am I? Detective Romano, would you like to come in now?" The warehouse doors burst open. Detective Romano and his internal affairs team stormed in with their weapons drawn, followed by 6 FBI agents. "NYPD Internal Affairs, everyone on the ground, now!" Chaos erupted. Criminals scattered in every direction, but Bumpy's men were blocking all the exits. O'Malley and his officers found themselves surrounded by federal agents, while flashbulbs popped from the photographer documenting everything. In the middle of the madness, Bumpy Johnson stood perfectly still, watching O'Malley realize that his entire world was falling apart. "You see, Captain," Bumpy said, his voice carrying over the shouting, "you made a mistake 2 weeks ago. You thought beating me up would make you look strong. You thought terrorizing my neighborhood would prove you were in charge." O'Malley was being handcuffed, but his eyes never left Bumpy's face. "But what you really did was declare war on the wrong man. You hurt me in front of my community. You disrespected everything I've built. You thought my people would be too scared to testify against you." Bumpy stepped closer. "You were right. They were too scared to testify. But not because they were afraid of you. They were afraid of what I'd do to you if they talked. They were protecting you, Captain. From me." O'Malley's face went white as the truth hit him. "Every witness to your brutality stayed silent because I asked them to, because I told them I was handling this my way, because I promised them that your punishment would be worse than anything the courts could deliver." Detective Romano was reading O'Malley his rights, but Bumpy kept talking. 27 counts of corruption, 15 counts of racketeering, 8 counts of conspiracy, 3 counts of civil rights violations. The federal prosecutors tell me you're looking at 30 years minimum." Bumpy leaned in close enough that only O'Malley could hear his next words. "That beating you gave me, that was 5 minutes of pain. This is the rest of your life." As O'Malley was dragged away, Bumpy turned to address the remaining criminals who were also being arrested. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. When you do business in New York, you remember who really runs these streets. It's not the corrupt cops. It's not the politicians. It's not the mob families." He adjusted his tie and straightened his jacket. "It's the people who understand that real power isn't about who can hurt you. It's about who can destroy you completely without laying a finger on you." The warehouse was empty within 20 minutes. 37 arrests, including 6 police officers. The biggest police corruption bust in New York history. Bumpy Johnson walked out the front door a free man while Captain O'Malley began his journey to federal prison. Justice had been served, Harlem style. The headlines hit the newspapers the next morning. "Massive police corruption ring exposed in Queens raid." By afternoon, the story had spread across the country. The photographs of Captain O'Malley being arrested alongside 30 criminals made front pages from New York to Los Angeles. The corruption scandal became the biggest story in the city. O'Malley's trial became a media sensation. The evidence was overwhelming. 6 months of recorded conversations, financial records showing thousands of dollars in protection payments, testimony from criminals who flipped rather than face federal charges. The defense tried to argue entrapment, but the prosecution had a simple response. O'Malley had been running his protection racket for years. Bumpy Johnson had simply documented what was already happening. O'Malley was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. His 5 officers received sentences ranging from 8 to 15 years. Their careers were over. Their pensions were revoked. Their families lost everything. But the real story wasn't what happened to O'Malley. The real story was what happened to the NYPD's relationship with Harlem. Within a week of O'Malley's arrest, Police Commissioner William Walsh issued a public apology to the Harlem community. New policies were implemented for police conduct in minority neighborhoods. A civilian review board was established to investigate complaints of police brutality. More importantly, word spread through every precinct in the city about what had happened to Captain O'Malley. The message was clear. If you declare war on Harlem, if you abuse your authority in Bumpy Johnson's neighborhood, you better be prepared for consequences that go far beyond anything you can imagine. Police harassment in Harlem didn't disappear overnight, but it decreased dramatically. Cops who used to swagger through the neighborhood with impunity now walked more carefully. The casual brutality that had defined police-community relations for decades suddenly carried real risks. Mickey Sullivan, who had played his part perfectly in Bumpy's plan, was given a new identity and relocated to Chicago. The FBI kept their promise to protect him in exchange for his cooperation. Detective Romano was promoted and transferred to head up the NYPD's new Internal Affairs Division. His first assignment, cleaning up the corruption that O'Malley's arrest had exposed throughout the department. Reporter Martinez won a Pulitzer Prize for his exposé of police corruption. His photographs of O'Malley's arrest became iconic images of the fight for civil rights. But perhaps the most telling aftermath was what happened to those 200 witnesses who had stayed silent about Bumpy's beating. 3 months after O'Malley's conviction, the district attorney's office quietly closed their investigation into the assault on Bumpy Johnson. With O'Malley in federal prison and no witnesses willing to testify, there was no case to prosecute. The civil rights groups that had demanded justice were frustrated, but they didn't understand what had really happened. Justice hadn't been denied. Justice had been delivered in a way that was more complete and more devastating than any assault conviction could have achieved. Because Bumpy Johnson had proven something that day in the warehouse, real power isn't about winning battles. It's about winning wars. It's not about getting revenge. It's about getting results. O'Malley thought he could terrorize one man and intimidate an entire community. Instead, he destroyed his own career and reformed an entire police department. The beating had lasted 5 minutes. The consequences lasted the rest of O'Malley's life. Harlem learned something too. They learned that their protector wasn't just a numbers runner or a street tough. He was a strategist who could outthink federal investigators, manipulate corrupt cops, and coordinate law enforcement operations that professional detectives envied. Most importantly, they learned that silence could be more powerful than testimony, that loyalty could achieve more than legal proceedings, that sometimes the best way to get justice was to trust the man who had never let them down before. The story of O'Malley's downfall became legend in Harlem. People told it for years afterward, passing it down to their children and grandchildren. It became a lesson about patience, strategy, and the difference between getting even and getting ahead. Bumpy Johnson never spoke publicly about what happened that night in Queens. When reporters asked him about O'Malley's arrest, he would just smile and say, "Justice has a funny way of working itself out." The O'Malley scandal changed everything about how power worked in New York City. It proved that corruption could be defeated, but not through traditional channels. It showed that real justice sometimes required thinking 10 moves ahead of your enemies. But most importantly, it established a principle that would guide Harlem for the next 20 years. When the system fails you, build a better system. Bumpy Johnson didn't just get revenge on a corrupt cop. He exposed an entire network of corruption. He didn't just protect himself. He protected his entire community. He didn't just win a battle. He changed the rules of the war. The lesson wasn't about violence or intimidation. It was about intelligence, patience, and understanding that true power comes from knowing more than your enemies and thinking further ahead than they can imagine. O'Malley thought he was dealing with a street thug who could be broken with a beating. Instead, he was facing a master strategist who had turned his own corruption into the weapon that destroyed him. The 200 witnesses who stayed silent understood something the newspapers never figured out. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. Sometimes loyalty means trusting someone else to handle justice their way. Sometimes silence speaks louder than any testimony ever could. This is why Bumpy Johnson became a legend, not because he was the toughest or the most ruthless, but because he understood that real power isn't about what you can do to your enemies. It's about what you can make your enemies do to themselves. Power isn't about the gun in your hand, it's about the information in your head and the patience to use it right. If this story opened your eyes to how real power actually works, smash that like button right now. Hit subscribe and ring that notification bell because we're just getting started with these untold stories of how Bumpy Johnson really operated. Drop a comment and let me know. Do you think those 200 witnesses made the right choice staying silent? Would you have trusted Bumpy to handle justice his way? Next week, we're telling the story of how Bumpy Johnson walked into the mayor's office with no appointment and walked out with the keys to the city. Literally. You're not going to want to miss that. Remember, in the streets, respect isn't given, it's earned, and justice isn't served, it's delivered.